Notre Dame is still without a commitment through 5 days of the transfer portal window, but they just wrapped up their most important day of visits yet, with more big names on the way. And now comes the hard part, actually closing on these top targets with pressure building by the hour. We're breaking it all down coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network, all thanks to your support. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum, producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. Thank you for joining me here on Wednesday, January 7th, and for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. Before we get rolling, please take a second to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel or following along on your favorite podcast platform so that way you don't miss any of our daily coverage all season long, but especially during this crazy transfer portal window. This is the time when you need to be subscribed so you're getting all the updates as they happen. And don't forget, the Friday mailbag is back this week, and you can submit your questions in the YouTube comments or on social media. You can find us on X at Locked On Irish and on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Today's episode is brought to you by reshape. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now is the time. Head to reshape.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. reshape ready, feel present, feel confident, feel ready. I'm feeling ready to talk about some good news, okay? Because, look, I'll admit, yesterday was not the most fun episode, but I felt that my criticisms were warranted. But today, this episode is going to be a lot more optimistic because we have more positive things to talk about, even though we're 5 days into the transfer portal window, the one and only portal window of the year, and Notre Dame has still not landed a commitment as of this recording. But we're going to start by breaking down a massive day of official visits and why one defensive tackle in particular feels like a must-win for Notre Dame. Then we're going to take a look at several other portal targets who have not visited yet but are very much in play for Notre Dame, including a 5-star Notre Dame commit and a high upside wide receiver that Ohio State fans are very upset to see leave. And finally, we're going to close with my thoughts on former Notre Dame quarterback Kenny Minchey flipping his commitment from Nebraska to Kentucky at the 11th hour in what has become one of the craziest recruitments in this entire window. Plus, we got a few other portal updates on the way out. But let's start with the guys who are on campus Tuesday for their official visit. And for some of these guys, that visit will extend into today. But out of all the visitors on campus, Xavier Gilliam is by far the most important of the ones who were there on Tuesday. And so far, I have heard that his visit has gone really, really well for Notre Dame. And that is important because Notre Dame absolutely has to get this done. If Gilliam leaves South Bend without committing, that is a major concern because Tennessee is a very serious threat. Gilliam visited Tennessee before coming to Notre Dame, and he has strong connections there. Jim Knowles, Gilliam's defensive coordinator at Penn State this past season, is now the defensive coordinator at Tennessee. So there's familiarity there, not just with him as a person, but also the scheme. And Tennessee's defensive line coach, Rodney Garner, is one of the most respected D-line coaches in the entire country, and Gilliam has said that he left a great impression. Gilliam also visited Indiana before going to Tennessee and Notre Dame, but considering he left there without committing, I believe that means IU is probably off the table based on what we know about how Curt Cignetti operates. Cignetti is going to offer these guys a ton of money when they are there on their official visit, but it's a take it or leave it situation. That's what happened with Nick Marsh. According to Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated, Indiana offered Marsh $2 million and said if he leaves and he takes that visit to Notre Dame, that offer is off the table. So Marsh didn't leave. He committed on the spot. Gilliam left campus. So I take that to mean it is down to Notre Dame and Tennessee. I like Notre Dame's chances here. I think they're going to get this done, but they need to close this before he leaves campus. Gilliam has become even more important now that Mateen Ibarogba has officially committed to Texas Tech. Just quick side on that. What a saga that was. If you were following that on the message boards and on Twitter, it was all over the place because Mateen was not visiting Notre Dame, and then he was visiting Notre Dame, and then that visit was canceled, and then it was back on. Well, it's finally over. He's committed to Texas Tech. Is it a loss for Notre Dame? Yes. But is it a win for our collective sanity? Also, yes. But going back to Xavier Gilliam, he is not the only defensive tackle that Notre Dame is evaluating, but he's clearly a top priority. I'm not saying he's the next Aaron Donald. He's not. And he's going to have to compete for a starting job, but there is a lot to like here. He's listed at 6'2", 300 pounds. He can get after the quarterback. He recorded 15 pressures last season, and with 3 years of eligibility remaining, many expect him to take a big step forward under Charlie Partridge, Notre Dame's new defensive line coach, if Partridge gets the opportunity to coach him. Landon Gilliam is priority number one coming out of yesterday. I would put John Henry Daly, the defensive end from Utah, at number 2 on the priority list of the guys who are on campus on Tuesday, assuming that Notre Dame can get some clarity on his injury. John Henry Daly claims that he will be back and ready to go by the middle of the summer. I'm skeptical, but it's not impossible. As we talked about on yesterday's show, there are some reports that John Henry Daly suffered a torn Achilles on November 22nd in Utah's game against Kansas State. If that's the case, and he truly ruptured his Achilles tendon, I doubt he plays at all in 2026. Certainly not before November at the absolute earliest. I think we saw that with Cooper Flanagan this past season when they tried to rush his recovery a little bit after he suffered a ruptured Achilles at the very start of 2025 on January 2nd in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. Just wasn't able to get back out there on the field anywhere near 100%. So we're going to have to wait and see what the story is with John Henry Daly. But I asked around about whether players typically go through physicals during official visits, and the answer I got was not usually, but given the uncertainty with Daly, I'm sure his health was a major topic of discussion on his visit. So if he's healthy and he can truly return at full strength, he would be a massive addition for the Irish. In 11 games last season, he lit up the stat sheet with 48 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, and 47 quarterback pressures. That production is why On3 has him as a top 10 overall player in the transfer portal and the number 2 edge rusher. Notre Dame has been very quiet publicly with Daly, which tells me they're doing their own internal evaluation. They're certainly doing their due diligence. And even if he's a little further behind than what he's letting on, and he can't contribute until, let's say, late September or early October, if it's not a full tear, but he can get back out in the field next year, I think he would absolutely be worthwhile as long as the price tag isn't too extreme. Then there's another defensive end, Jalen Thompson from Michigan State. I'll just be honest with you. I have struggled to get a good read on the Jalen Thompson situation with Notre Dame. He visited Texas A&M before coming to South Bend and was also working on getting a visit set up at Mississippi State. I don't know if that visit to Mississippi State has been finalized just yet, but Thompson was a 3-year starter at Michigan State, which makes me wonder what his appetite is for coming to Notre Dame, where he likely wouldn't start. He would compete. He'd certainly play a lot, but he's not going to walk in the Goog and be a starter on day one. And in his career, he's already played in 31 games. He's recorded 66 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, and 4.5 sacks. So he would absolutely play and be part of the rotation for Notre Dame next season. But if he went somewhere like a Mississippi State, he might have a clearer path to guaranteed snaps. But Thompson is a Detroit native, so Notre Dame could appeal as a way to stay closer to home for his final year of college football. So I could see this thing going in several different directions, and the staff may wait to see how things shake out with other targets, which we'll get to in segment 2. But the fact that he was on campus is certainly encouraging for Notre Dame if they do decide to take him. Next up, we got quarterback Braden Atkinson from Mercer. He made it to campus, and whether he ends up at Notre Dame or not, this is easily the biggest visit of his career. Coming out of high school, Atkinson only had FBS offers from Boston College and Miami, Ohio, but he decided to go to the FCS, play at Mercer, and he lit it up. After one season tearing it up at the FCS level, he's visiting one of the premier programs in all of college football. So really cool experience for him and his family. Not surprisingly, Atkinson is very interested in what Notre Dame has to offer, both from a football and academic standpoint, because he's only going to be a sophomore next season, so he's still got several years left. He'll get his degree at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's interest is obvious as well, given their desire for an experienced backup quarterback. Now, my guy Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated, who we've already mentioned on today's show, compared Atkinson to Drew Pine, and I just don't see it that way. He's not Kenny Minchey, but Drew Pine didn't throw for 3,600 yards at the FCS level. I don't think he could do that because he was just benched this past season at Bowling Green. I know that Bowling Green is not in the FCS, but still, Drew Pine is in like his 8th year of college football, and he's getting benched at Bowling Green. So, look, I'm higher on Braden Atkinson than most. I don't think he's the long-term future for Notre Dame at the quarterback position, but he'd be a quality safety net behind C.J. Carr next season. And then after that, you can let Teddy Gerard and Noah Grubbs and then Atkinson battle it out to be the starting quarterback in 2027. But in the short term, I think Atkinson is absolutely a take for the Irish. Someone who's not a take, and I said this yesterday, wide receiver Xavier Townsend from Iowa State. He was also on campus, but given how things are trending, I would be pretty surprised if he ends up at Notre Dame. He has visits scheduled to Purdue and Missouri later this week. Those feel like better fits to me. I understand the appeal of adding a veteran wide receiver to that room, especially after KK Smith left, and that just leaves them with a lot of young guys outside of Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse on the front line. But I just don't really see a role for Xavier Townsend at this point in time. He didn't produce at a high level at UCF, and he didn't produce at a high level in his one and only season at Iowa State. There could be a role for him on special teams, not even as a return man, as a gunner, or on different coverage units or things like that. But with only 1 year of eligibility left, is that really how he wants to spend it? We'll see. But as of now, I'd be a little surprised if Townsend ends up with the Irish. So that's what Notre Dame got done on campus, but the board is far from set. Coming up, we're going to talk about the portal targets who have not visited yet, but could swing this entire cycle if the Irish can close. That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. Thank you for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you have not already, make sure to check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Irish. Same show, same schedule, just no ads, and it works on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. If you listen every day, it's a really easy upgrade. Go to lockedonirish.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited-time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. When you open the FanDuel app during Happy Hour, it always brings something new, from boosts to bonuses and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes, and the timing is perfect, right before the games and right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, we are back here on Locked On Irish talking about all the latest news and updates for Notre Dame in the transfer portal. And look, it is no secret that it has been a slow start for the Irish in this transfer portal window, but I expect things to change in a hurry. And as a matter of fact, we got arguably the biggest update to date on Tuesday night. Let me set this up for you. If any of you out there are looking for a good TV show to watch, one of my all-time favorites is Season 1 of True Detective on HBO. You only need to watch Season 1 because it's a new cast and a new storyline every single season, but that first one is truly one of the best in television history, in my opinion. After that, it falls off pretty hard, but Season 1 stars Matthew McConaughey, Woody Harrelson. They play two detectives investigating a murder in Louisiana, and there is a great line in that season from Matthew McConaughey's character, Russ Cole. And you may have heard it before. Quote, "Time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we are going to do over and over and over again." End quote. So when Tom Loy from 24/7 Sports broke the news that Keon Keeley, the former five-star edge rusher who was committed to Notre Dame way back in the class of 2023, is going to be on campus today, January 7th, 2026, for a visit, that is the quote I thought of. time really is a flat circle if Keon Keeley is back in South Bend on official visits, and now there are a lot of people in the fan base who are going nuts. And look, I understand it. When Keon Keeley committed to Notre Dame, it was a huge deal. He was like the centerpiece of one of Marcus Freeman's earlier recruiting classes, one of the highest rated players to commit to Notre Dame in a really long time. But obviously, he didn't end up signing with Notre Dame. He decommitted and ultimately ended up committing to Alabama to play for Nick Saban. And then once Nick Saban left, people thought Keeley might end back up at Notre Dame. Well, it had not happened. It has not happened, but now it might happen. But a lot has changed in the time since Keeley decommitted from Notre Dame to join the Alabama Crimson Tide, because in 3 years at Alabama, Keeley never came close to living up to that 5-star billing. He was the number 2 rated player overall in that entire 2023 recruiting class when all was said and done. But you would not know that based on his production at Alabama. He redshirted his freshman season, didn't see the field at all. He got on the field for a grand total of 10 total snaps in 2024 as a redshirt freshman. And he was not much of a factor in 2025 either until the first-round playoff game against Oklahoma, when he played more than any other game of his career, 35 snaps in total, and he finished with 4 tackles, a sack, and a pass deflection. He looked really good in that game. But then a week later, he only got on the field for 11 snaps in the blowout loss to Indiana. So I'm not sure if that performance against Oklahoma was an outlier or if it was a sign of things to come. But if Notre Dame actually ends up landing Keon Keeley, and it is certainly trending that way, it is not going to be framed as the star addition it once was, but it still could be a very valuable addition for Notre Dame this cycle. And look, initially, I felt like Notre Dame should pass on him. I think I even said that to Brian Smith on our show on Monday. But Notre Dame needs bodies on the defensive line. They need depth. I don't think Keon Keeley is going to be a starter. But if they are able to maximize his frame and his potential, Keon Keeley could be very impactful in the rotation on the Notre Dame defensive line next season. There are some questions about where he would play for Notre Dame, because when he started out his career at Alabama, he was an outside linebacker, and then they moved him over to the defensive line, and then I think they even tried him out at 3 technique. So maybe that's part of the reason why he hasn't been able to produce all that much, because he's had to put on a lot more weight. He's had to learn new positions, and even for a 5-star, that's pretty hard. But we know he's a high-end athlete, and he raises the physical ceiling of the room. So Notre Dame could absolutely take him, and they would add depth off the edge. And from a storyline standpoint, I mean, this would be absolutely wild. It would give me plenty of things to talk about, and just the idea of a former 5-star who was committed to Notre Dame, who then didn't pan out at Alabama, who would then potentially come back through the transfer portal. Like, in a way, that's modern college football in a nutshell. So bottom line, if the price is right and the expectations are managed for both sides, on Notre Dame's side and the Keeley side, I think that Keon Keeley is a reasonable gamble. And at this point, I do believe he's going to end up with the Irish. Now let's talk about the most interesting wide receiver name who is starting to trend toward Notre Dame, and that is Mylan Graham from Ohio State. On Tuesday night, Tom Loy reported that Notre Dame is actively working to get a deal done with Graham. There are still some final details that are being worked through. Reading between the lines here, I believe that has to do with academics, but Mylan Graham is a player that you take a gamble on. He was the number 33 player overall and the number 7 wide receiver in the 24/7 Sports composite for the class of 2024. And usually, if you're bringing up recruiting rankings for a player in the transfer portal, that means that player is probably not that good, and they just have not done anything to live up to the recruiting ranking in college. But believe me, Graham is a legitimate 5-star talent. The problem is he has spent his career buried behind 2 first-round wide receivers in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, and then Brandon Inniss, who is also a very talented wide receiver. But Graham had a massive showing in Ohio State's spring game this past season. He had 4 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown. It created real buzz in that fan base. There's a section of that Ohio State fan base who wanted Mylan Graham to be the number 3 wide receiver and not Brandon Inniss, but that ended up being more production than Graham would have during the entire 2025 season. He finished the year with just 6 catches for 93 yards. Ohio State did not rotate that much at wide receiver, and why would you when you have 2 first-rounders on the outside? But Graham has been very honest about where he's at in his career. He spoke at the Cotton Bowl Media Day before Ohio State took on Miami, and he said that he needs to become more consistent and more physical, but that he feels close to breaking through. And honestly, that tracks. He is not a finished product, but the upside is obvious. He's from Indiana, so there's a connection there. I think Marcus Freeman really, really likes him as a player. He's long, smooth, explosive, and he still has 3 years of eligibility remaining. Notre Dame would be betting on potential here, not immediate dominance, but unlike some of the other receiver options, I think Graham could be a really dynamic player like Nick Marsh. He's not as good and certainly has not produced at the level of Nick Marsh, but if Notre Dame can get the academic side worked out with Mylan Graham, this would be a huge win for the Irish and a big upgrade over a guy like Ian Strong from Rutgers, who Notre Dame was looking at earlier in the week. So if they're able to get that done, that would be a sneaky big win for the Irish in this cycle. On the safer side, another wide receiver Notre Dame has been connected to is Reed Harris from Boston College. We've talked about him on the show quite a bit in recent days. As of now, I have not heard of a visit being scheduled, but it does sound like Notre Dame is in solid position here. I haven't seen many people on the Notre Dame beat talk about Reed Harris in Notre Dame other than Tim O'Malley from Irish Illustrated, but I've heard people on the Boston College side of things who believe Harris is bound for Notre Dame. So I'm not really sure what to make of the situation right now, but I do know that Harris fills a very specific need for Notre Dame at boundary wide receiver. He's not Nick Marsh, and he's not Mylan Graham from an upside standpoint, but he's a functional piece for what Notre Dame needs. Harris is listed at 6'5", 220 pounds. This past season at Boston College, he recorded 673 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, which is a team high. He gives you size, physicality, and a true outside presence who can go out there and make contested catches. That's not really what Mylan Graham is built to do. But Harris is a legitimate red zone target and a contested catch option for CJ Carr next season. So if Notre Dame lands Harris, it's not quite a home run like Malachi Fields or Nick Marsh, but he brings an element to the room that they are desperately missing right now. I view it as a stabilizing move, one that provides more security to a receiver room that lacks proven options outside of Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse to some extent, I guess you should say. But if this is real, it's something you'd like to see materialize soon, and I don't think this is an either-or situation with Graham and Harris either. If they can get both, they'll take both. And finally, let's talk about Francis Brew for the Pittsburgh Panthers. Brew entered the portal on Tuesday. He is not a name that we talked about on this show or really any other Notre Dame show as far as I know. But as soon as he entered the transfer portal, he became a name that Notre Dame fans were immediately interested in. He's a proven defensive tackle who has produced at a high level in the Power Four. And the connection that everyone is pointing to is Charlie Partridge, Notre Dame's new defensive line coach, because Partridge recruited Brew to Pitt before he ended up leaving for the Indianapolis Colts. Now that Partridge is back in the college ranks and back at Notre Dame, that connection is real and it's important. But interest does not mean that he's just going to go back to that guy because he recruited him a few years ago. You know, maybe Francis is pissed at Partridge for leaving him before he even got to campus at Pittsburgh, but at least we know they have a relationship. And then very late on Tuesday night, Bruce Feldman of The Athletic reported that Brew will visit Notre Dame, but his visit schedule is pretty loaded. He's also going to visit Tennessee later today on Wednesday. Then he'll be at Notre Dame on Thursday and Friday of this week, Indiana over the weekend, and he could also visit Miami, Florida, and Ohio State. That should tell you everything you need to know about how coveted Francis Brew is. He's one of the top defensive tackles in the portal now, and from Notre Dame's perspective, this is massive because Brew is more proven than most of the defensive tackles they've been chasing, even Xavier Gilliam, and he fits exactly what they need, someone who can step in and start immediately. Brew is not as big as Gilliam. He's only 6'1", 280 pounds, but the man squats 700 pounds and benches nearly 500. I bet he's on Bruce Feldman's freaks list next year. He was also named a freshman All-American last year as a redshirt freshman, and he racked up 36 tackles, 8 TFLs, and 2 sacks last season for the Panthers. He was not recruited very highly out of high school, but he's already developed into one of the best defensive linemen in the ACC. In an ideal world, Notre Dame could land Brew and Gilliam to play defensive tackle. But if I had to pick one, I would take Francis Brew. And then if you add in Keon Keeley to the mix, who might be able to play 3 tech as well for the Irish, they might have more options than we ever thought they could have, especially as of yesterday or the day before that. So if they land all three of these guys, plus John Henry Daly, that would be a fantastic haul for Notre Dame on the defensive line. All right, let's shift gears here before we wrap things up because a former Notre Dame quarterback made some late-night headlines on Monday, and there are a few more portal updates you need to know. More on that right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Wojciak. Let's talk about something most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life, it doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Wojciak Ready is designed to help you take back control. Wojciak Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. Wojciak Ready combines 3 clinically proven ingredients in 1 mint that dissolves under your tongue so it absorbs fast. You connect with a board-certified doctor online, and everything ships discreetly to your door. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Most men are ready in about 15 minutes on average, so you can stay present, confident, and in control when the moment is right. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now is the time. Head to Wojciak.com/LockedOnCollege. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Wojciak Ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. We're back here on Locked On Irish, and I just got to say, things move quickly in the transfer portal, so it's not the biggest story anymore. But the biggest news on Monday night involved former Notre Dame quarterback Kenny Minchey after he flipped his commitment from Nebraska to Kentucky. Minchey told ESPN that just one day after announcing his commitment to Nebraska, he reversed course and signed with Kentucky. I feel awful for Nebraska fans, for all of them except Will Compton from Bussin' with the Boys. And look, I understand Will Compton was fighting the good fight for Notre Dame at the end of the season when there was all kinds of discussion about whether or not Notre Dame would be in the playoff. He was one of the few people in the media defending Notre Dame, so I respect that. But man, he turned on Kenny Minchey in a hurry. And look, I understand why Nebraska fans are upset. They lost Dylan Raiola. They got all excited about Kenny Minchey, and then he just left him the day before his visit, even though I think everything was already agreed to. Minchey had not signed, but it doesn't matter anymore because now Kenny Minchey is headed to Lexington, Kentucky, and he's going to join first-year head coach Will Stein, who was hired after a 3-year run as offensive coordinator at Oregon, and he's still coaching the Ducks during their college football playoff run. Very respected offensive mind. Will Stein is actually from Kentucky, although he played quarterback for the Louisville Cardinals as a backup. So he's had a homecoming, and now he's bringing Kenny Minchey, who's from not that far away. Like Nashville is not that far from Lexington, so he's got that going for him. And overall, I just think this is a really good fit for Kenny Minchey. He gets a legitimate opportunity to start in the SEC, but he's going to be playing for a program that nobody ever really has high expectations for. They usually have a pretty good offensive line. It's like the one thing they have. They call it the big blue wall. And, the rest of the team might not be great. He's probably not going to have a ton of great wide receivers to work with, but at least he's going to be protected. And I did not think that would be the case for him at Nebraska. And he's playing for a head coach with a strong track record developing quarterbacks. And Kentucky's situation is interesting. They're willing to throw around some money. I mean, they brought in Sam Leavitt from Arizona State for an official visit over the weekend. There was a point in time where a lot of people thought Leavitt would end up with Kentucky. And then on Tuesday night, he was actually at a basketball game. I'm talking about Leavitt, not Minchey. They were at a basketball game with Lane Kiffin, and then while they were at that game, news broke that DeMond Williams, the quarterback from Washington, who just 4 days ago announced he had agreed to a new deal to come back to Washington, is now in the transfer portal, and people are saying that it's LSU who's trying to poach him away. So look, it's craziness, right? And nobody is really talking about Kenny Minchey on the national stage anymore, but I just find it so funny that Kenny Minchey, who is a player at Notre Dame, who was no drama, right? Always quiet, behind the scenes, great leader, great teammate, handled the loss in the quarterback competition as well as anyone possibly could. And then for at least a few hours in the college football world, everyone was talking about Kenny Minchey. And it's not just that they were talking about him. Minchey is going to get paid, man. Maybe he's already gotten paid. And when you think about his production, I mean, this is a guy who completed 20 of 26 passes for less than 200 yards last season. He did rush for 84 yards and a touchdown, but now he is getting paid potentially upwards of $2 million. Think about that. Steve Angeli went to Syracuse, and I believe he got just over $1 million, and Angeli was more proven. He had at least had a drive in the college football playoff and had played a lot more in garbage time over the course of 2 seasons, and he also had a start in the Sun Bowl to go along with that. And now, in this current market of the transfer portal, looks like Kenny Minchey is going to demand double what Steve Angeli made when he transferred out. Is Kenny Minchey a better player than Steve Angeli? I think so, but he certainly has not shown enough on the field to prove that just yet. But Will Stein thinks really highly of him. I think really highly of Kenny Minchey, and you know what? I'm going to be rooting for him. And selfishly, this is a great win for me because now I can root for Kenny Minchey to have success. And if he does have success, I can tell all my friends from back home who went to Kentucky, who are big Kentucky fans, that all they needed was a former Notre Dame backup quarterback to provide their program with the spark. It'd be great, right? Because if Kenny Minchey has success, and I think he will, I can just still make fun of my friends. And that's what this is all about at the end of the day, right? Why else would you watch college football other than to celebrate with your friends who root for the same team and then make all of your friends who root for different teams and hate on them? It's like the whole point of what we're doing here. But before we go, I've got a couple quick portal updates on the way out. First, Notre Dame linebacker Preston Zinter officially entered the transfer portal. This one isn't a surprise given how much talent Notre Dame is returning at linebacker. They're going to have Snead back. They're going to have Drake Bowen back. They're going to have Jane Osbury back. Matt Framo is making moves. So those are going to be the top 4 guys. And then once Kingston Viliamuasa gets back, he is going to be very much a part of that rotation as well. So there just weren't enough snaps for Preston Zinter. He did really well on special teams, so it is a loss in that respect. But I hope the best for him because it sounds like he was a great player, great teammate. Former linebackers coach Max Bulla had great things to say about him, but unfortunately, he just wasn't able to carve out a path at Notre Dame. And then at the end this past year, they put him on the defensive line. I don't know if that was like a long-term move for him, but he's probably better off finding another home where he can get on the field quickly. Next up, former Notre Dame safety Jadon Blair is committed to Missouri. Blair basically got recruited over in a way. He also had Adon Schuler and Tate Johnson coming back in front of him, and I thought there was an expectation on the Blair side that he would be able to get on the field early, and that was just always going to be tough for him. And then you got, Joey O'Brien coming in as a high school recruit. It just wasn't going to be easy for him, so now he has a fresh start somewhere else. And finally, one more note that closes the book on a storyline we talked about extensively on yesterday's show. Tight end Brody Foley from Tulsa, who was originally set to visit Notre Dame on Monday before that visit was canceled, has now committed to the Louisville Cardinals. I went off a bit in yesterday's show about this and just the way that everything transpired because Notre Dame canceled the visit on the day he was supposed to arrive. But I have been given some feedback about what transpired, and I'm going to share it with you. It is true, Notre Dame did cancel his visit on the day he was supposed to get to South Bend, but it's my understanding that Foley saw what happened with Nick Marsh and Notre Dame and knew that there was probably a little bit more money for Notre Dame to spend. And Brody Foley believes he deserves tight end 1 money, but Notre Dame is not certain he would be tight end 1 for good reason. They'd like to have him, certainly, but they're probably higher on Cooper Flanagan because he's been around the program. And even though he's coming off a serious injury, he just missed the entire 2025 season, so you'd imagine he'd be in much better shape going into 2026. And if Brody Foley ends up being the backup, do you really want to spend $1 million on a backup tight end? That just doesn't seem like the best use of their resources. They've got guys in the room. They've got Ty Washington. They're obviously very high on Ian Premer. James Flanagan is going to be a redshirt freshman. So I still wish they could have taken him, but it didn't work out. Could everyone have handled it better? Yeah, probably. But look, this is the nature of the transfer portal sometimes. Look no further than the change in mood on this show. Yesterday, I was very concerned. But then good things started to happen, and now I'm feeling a lot better. Is there still a lot more work to be done? Absolutely. But the first time, really since Friday, I'm feeling really good about where things are headed for Notre Dame in the transfer portal. And that is a perfect note to end it on. That's going to do it for today's show. I appreciate all of you for tuning in and making this your first watch or listen of the day as we try to sort through another busy day in the transfer portal. I record these really late at night during the transfer portal cycle because you never know when news is going to break. But if you enjoyed today's show, make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or following along in your favorite podcast platform. Plus, you can help us out by giving this video a like or by rating the podcast 5 stars and leaving us a nice review. Don't forget to get those mailbag questions in for the Friday mailbag. A reminder, you can submit them in the YouTube comments or send them my way on X at Locked On Irish and on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. And by the way, if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club. Things are moving fast right now, and I'm going to be back tomorrow with more news, reactions, and updates as the transfer portal continues to move along, and hopefully, we'll finally have some actual commitments to talk about. Until then, have a great rest of your day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.